This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to this exploration of one of prehistory's most fascinating predator families, the Dromaeosauridae. These feathered hunters, better known as raptors, captivated our imaginations long before they stalked across movie screens. Today, we'll journey through their evolutionary history, examine their distinctive anatomy, including those infamous sickle claws, and discover how these intelligent, agile carnivores hunted during the Cretaceous period. Join us as we separate Hollywood myth from paleontological reality and meet the remarkable dinosaurs that forever changed how we view the ancient world. Chapter 1. Feather Discoveries Revolutionizing Our Understanding of Dinosaur Appearance and Bird Origins. For over a century, our mental image of dinosaurs remained locked in a vision of scaly, reptilian monsters. Museums displayed skeletons surrounded by artistic reconstructions showing dull grays and greens, with skin stretched taut over bones like oversized lizards. The Dromaeosaurids, when first discovered, seemed to fit this mold perfectly. Early illustrations showed them as sleek, lizard-skinned predators, their bodies bare except for the scales we assumed covered all dinosaurs. This vision would prove to be spectacularly wrong. The revolution began not with a sudden revelation, but with a slow accumulation of evidence that would eventually overturn everything we thought we knew. In the mid to late 1980s, some scientists began proposing something radical. Robert Bakker, known for challenging conventional wisdom about dinosaurs, started depicting dromaeosaurids with advanced feather coats in his illustrations. The response from much of the scientific community was swift and harsh. Hungelak, as one Dutch source describes it, fell upon him. The idea seemed preposterous. These were dinosaurs, not birds. Everyone knew what dinosaurs looked like. But Bakker had recognized something others had missed. The skeletal similarities between dromaeosaurids and early birds were too profound to ignore. When John Ostrom studied Deinonychus in the late 1960s, he had already noted the remarkable parallels between its skeleton and that of Archaeopteryx, the earliest known bird. The arms could fold against the body like wings. The bones were hollow and lightweight. The wrist joints moved in ways reminiscent of birds. Yet without direct evidence, without actual feathers preserved in stone, the idea remained speculation, easily dismissed by skeptics who saw only what they expected to see in the fossil record. The breakthrough came in 1999, when Chinese paleontologists Xu Xing, Wang Shaolin, and Wu Xiachun described a remarkable fossil from the Liaoning province of China. They named it Sinornithosaurus, and it would change everything. The specimen was preserved in fine-grained limestone, the kind of rock that can capture details of soft tissues that normally decay long before fossilization occurs. And there, surrounding the bones, were unmistakable impressions of feathers. Not scales, not bare bone, feathers. The Sinornithosaurus fossil showed a creature covered in a coat of downy, insulating feathers across its body, with longer, more complex feathers on its arms and tail. These weren't the simple hair-like structures that might have evolved merely for warmth. Some were pennaceous feathers, with a central shaft and branching barbs creating a vein, exactly like the flight feathers of modern birds. The creature measured about 6 feet in length, roughly the size of a large turkey. Its feathers weren't an afterthought or a minor detail. They were fundamental to its appearance, transforming it from a scaled reptile into something that looked unmistakably bird-like. This single discovery opened the floodgates. Paleontologists began looking at dromaeosaurid fossils with new eyes, and they began finding evidence of feathers everywhere. The Liaoning province, with its fine-grained sediments formed from volcanic ash that had buried animals quickly and completely, became the epicenter of discovery. Fossil after fossil emerged from these rocks, each one adding new details to our understanding of how these animals looked in life. Microraptor proved to be one of the most astonishing discoveries. This small dromaeosaurid, measuring only about 80 centimeters from nose to tail, was found with not 2, but 4 wings. Long, pennaceous feathers extended from both its arms and its legs, creating a configuration unlike anything seen in modern birds. The fossil showed these weren't just any feathers. They were asymmetrical flight feathers, the kind that create lift and enable controlled aerial movement. The tail bore an elongated, diamond-shaped fan of feathers at its tip, likely serving as a rudder and stabilizer during gliding or possibly even powered flight. Multiple specimens of Microraptor emerged from the fossil beds, and they all told the same story. One particularly well-preserved specimen showed feathers covering virtually every part of the body except the lower portions of the legs. The primary and secondary feathers on the arms were arranged exactly as they are in bird wings, overlapping in precise patterns. The iridescent quality of some feathers was even preserved, suggesting that at least some dromaeosaurids displayed colors that shimmered and changed depending on the angle of light, much like modern crows or grackles. The discovery of cryptovolans, whose name literally means hidden flyer, added another piece to the puzzle, though later analysis suggested it might actually be the same species as Microraptor. Regardless of its exact classification, the specimen showed the same remarkable four-winged configuration, with researchers initially reconstructing it with only 2 wings before recognizing their error. The corrected reconstruction revealed an animal that looked more like a biplane than a traditional bird, with its hind limbs spread to the sides to support the rear wing surfaces. Then came Sinornithosaurus halayana and other closely related species from the same region, each adding new details. Some fossils preserved different feather types on different parts of the body. The down-like feathers covering the torso and neck were different from the long, veined feathers of the wings and tail. This variety suggested a sophisticated integumentary system, with different feather types serving different functions, just as they do in modern birds, where down provides insulation while contour feathers create the body's streamlined shape. But these discoveries raised an obvious question. All these feathered dromaeosaurids came from one region of China, preserved in one particular type of rock. Could they be exceptions? Perhaps feathers were limited to this one group of small Asian species. Perhaps the larger, more famous dromaeosaurids, like Velociraptor, remained scaly after all. The answer came from an unexpected source. In 2007, paleontologists studying a Velociraptor specimen from Mongolia noticed something they had previously overlooked. Along the ulna, one of the forearm bones, were small bumps or tubercles. These weren't random irregularities. They were quill knobs, the attachment points where major wing feathers anchor to the bone in modern birds. Not all birds have prominent quill knobs, only those with particularly strong wing feathers, like fast flyers or those that use their wings for purposes other than gentle flight. The presence of quill knobs on Velociraptor meant that this animal, made famous by Jurassic Park as a scaly monster, had been covered in feathers all along. The specific specimen that revealed these quill knobs was catalogued as IGM 100/981, representing an animal estimated at about 1.5 meters long and 15 kilograms in weight. The spacing of 6 preserved knobs suggested that 8 additional knobs might have been present, giving a total of 14 quill knobs that would have supported large secondary feathers stemming from the forearm. This was an animal with wings, not the short, stubby arms of the movie monster, but long, feathered limbs that could have given it a distinctly bird-like silhouette. Following this discovery, paleontologists found quill knobs on other dromaeosaurids as well. Rhinovis, a species from Madagascar, initially classified as a bird before being recognized as a dromaeosaurid, showed clear evidence of these feather attachment points. The animal's forelimbs were built even more powerfully than those of Archaeopteryx, with robust attachment sites for the ligaments necessary for flapping flight. The evidence suggested that Rhinovis could probably fly, though it would have been more clumsy in the air than modern birds, lacking their refined flight control and efficiency. The game changer for understanding large dromaeosaurids came with Zhenyuan lung, discovered and described by Liu Zhengchang and Stephen Brassett in 2015. This specimen was relatively large for a feathered dromaeosaurid, and what made it remarkable was the preservation of a complete feather coat on a robust, ground-dwelling predator. The animal displayed proportionally large, aerodynamic wing feathers along with a tail-spanning fan. These were unexpected traits in an animal of this size, suggesting that even dromaeosaurids too large to fly retained elaborate plumage. The genuine long holotype showed long, pennaceous feathers covering the arms in multiple rows, creating a layered wing structure remarkably similar to modern birds. The feathers weren't just present, they were sophisticated, with proper veins and what appeared to be specialized coverts, the smaller feathers that smooth the airflow over a bird's wing. Here was direct, unambiguous evidence that large, powerful dromaeosaurids were not scaly lizards, but fully feathered animals. Dakota raptor, an even larger species from South Dakota, estimated at 5 to 6 meters in length, also showed quill knobs on its forearm bones when described in 2015. This made it one of the largest feathered dinosaurs known, though some researchers later disputed whether the specimen was a chimera, a mixture of bones from different animals. Even setting aside this controversy, the pattern was clear. Dromaeosaurids of all sizes, from all time periods, showed evidence of feathers. This accumulating evidence forced a fundamental reconsideration of dromaeosaurid biology. Feathers are metabolically expensive. They require significant energy to grow and maintain. In modern animals, extensive feathered or furry coats correlate strongly with endothermy, the ability to generate body heat internally rather than relying on external heat sources. The presence of complex feather coats across the entire Dromaeosaurid family suggested these weren't cold-blooded reptiles at all, but warm-blooded predators with metabolic rates more similar to modern birds than to lizards or crocodiles. The implications extended far beyond appearance. If dromaeosaurids were warm-blooded and feathered, they would have been capable of sustained activity in ways that cold-blooded reptiles cannot match. They could hunt at night, remain active in cooler temperatures, and maintain the high energy levels needed for the quick, agile movements their skeletal structure suggested. The feathers themselves would have served multiple purposes beyond simple insulation. The elaborate tail fans and wing feathers could have been used in display, perhaps in courtship rituals or territorial disputes. The wings could have aided in balance while running or climbing, or helped them maneuver while attacking prey. The evidence even extended to behavior. Some researchers speculated that dromaeosaurids might have brooded their eggs like modern birds, using their feathered bodies to regulate nest temperature. This hypothesis gained support from discoveries of Oviraptorosaurians, close relatives of dromaeosaurids, preserved in brooding positions over nests. If Oviraptorosaurians showed this behavior, dromaeosaurids likely did as well. Perhaps most significantly, the feather discoveries transformed our understanding of the relationship between dinosaurs and birds. The similarities between dromaeosaurid feathers and bird feathers weren't superficial. The feathers were identical in structure, down to the microscopic level. The arrangement of feathers on dromaeosaurid bodies matched the arrangement on birds. The presence of different feather types, specialized for different functions, mirrored the situation in birds. This wasn't convergent evolution, different lineages independently evolving similar solutions. This was homology, shared inheritance from a common ancestor. The overall pattern of dromaeosaurid feathers looked remarkably similar to Archaeopteryx, the Jurassic animal long considered the earliest bird. Both had pennaceous feathers on the arms and tail, with shorter, downy feathers covering the body. Both had feather attachment points on their arm bones. The skeletal similarities that had long been noted suddenly made perfect sense. Dromaeosaurids and birds weren't just related, they were very close relatives, perhaps sharing a common ancestor in the Jurassic period, with both lineages inheriting the feathered body plan that had evolved in that ancestor. Some researchers went further, proposing that dromaeosaurids might actually have descended from flying ancestors. If the earliest paraveians, the group that includes dromaeosaurids, truronatids, and birds, could fly or glide, then the larger ground-dwelling dromaeosaurids might represent a secondary loss of flight. This would explain why even large terrestrial species retained elaborate wing feathers, traits that seem excessive for a purely ground-dwelling predator. The wings might be evolutionary holdovers, retained from flying ancestors and repurposed for new functions, like display, balance, or prey capture. The revolution in our understanding extended into popular culture as well. The scaly monsters of Jurassic Park, while entertaining, were revealed to be fundamentally wrong. The real animals would have looked dramatically different, covered in plumage that might have made them appear bulkier and less sleek. Their movements would have been different too, with wings that could spread and fold, creating visual displays far more impressive than any reptilian head bobbing. The colors and patterns of their feathers remain unknown, but if modern birds provide any guide, they may have displayed spectacular iridescence, bold patterns, or dramatic color contrasts. Museums around the world began replacing their old reconstructions. The lizard-skinned raptors disappeared, replaced by feathered versions that looked like crosses between birds and reptiles, often with wings prominently displayed. Children grew up with a new mental image of these predators, one that emphasized their bird-like qualities rather than their reptilian heritage. The change represented more than updated science. It represented a fundamental shift in how we understood the deep evolutionary connections between dinosaurs and the birds that fly above us today. The feather discoveries continue to reshape our understanding. Each new fossil from the Liaoning deposits or elsewhere has the potential to reveal new details about feather structure, coloration, or function. The story of dromaeosaurid feathers is still being written, with each chapter adding depth to our picture of these remarkable animals that bridge the gap between the age of dinosaurs and the age of birds. Chapter 2. The Sickle Claw Mystery. The most iconic feature of any dromaeosaurid is the enlarged, sickle-shaped claw on the second toe of each foot. This curved talon has captured imaginations since the first dromaeosaurid fossils were discovered, and it has spawned decades of fierce scientific debate. Unlike the feather question, which was largely settled by fossil evidence, the function of the sickle claw remains contentious, with competing theories still battling for supremacy in the scientific literature. When John Ostrom described Deinonychus in 1969, he immediately recognized that the enlarged second toe claw was something special. The claw was held in a hyperextended position, raised off the ground while the animal walked. Fossilized trackways would later confirm this, showing only 2 toe impressions where 3 might be expected. The third and fourth toes bore the animal's weight, while the second toe, with its formidable weapon, hung suspended above the ground, kept sharp and ready for use. Ostrom's interpretation was bold and vivid. He proposed that the claw functioned as a blade-like slashing weapon, comparable to the canines of saber-toothed cats. In his vision, dromaeosaurids attacked with powerful kicks, using the sickle claw to cut deep gashes into prey. The scenario was dramatic and easy to visualize. A pack of Deinonychus, working together, could leap at a large dinosaur, slashing again and again with those terrible claws, opening wounds that would bleed the victim into submission. This interpretation caught fire in the popular imagination. The idea of killer dinosaurs with switchblade claws was irresistible. When Jurassic Park brought velociraptors to the screen decades later, the slashing claw became central to their menace. In one memorable scene, a character holds up a fossilized claw and describes exactly how it would be used, demonstrating the ripping motion that would tear open a victim's belly. The image was so powerful that it became the default assumption, repeated in countless books, documentaries, and museum displays. But Ostrom hadn't pulled this idea from thin air. He drew comparisons to modern birds, specifically ostriches and cassowaries. These large flightless birds have enlarged claws on their feet, and they're known to be dangerous animals. Ostrom cited reports claiming that cassowaries could sever an arm or disembowel a human with their claws. The cassowary claw can reach 125 millimeters in length, about 5 inches, making it a formidable weapon by any standard. The cassowary comparison seemed perfect. Here were modern animals with similar weapons, and they were demonstrably capable of inflicting terrible injuries. The logic appeared sound. If cassowaries could disembowel with their claws, surely dromaeosaurids with even larger and more curved talons could do the same. But science requires more than logical assumptions. It demands testing, evidence, verification. And when researchers actually examined the cassowary evidence carefully, problems emerged. In 1999 and 2003, researcher Christopher Kofrin undertook a comprehensive study of documented cassowary attacks, examining 241 cases where cassowaries had attacked humans or other animals. The results were surprising. Only one human had been killed, along with 2 dogs. More importantly, Kofrin found no evidence that cassowaries could actually disembowel or dismember other animals. This was a critical finding. The entire cassowary analogy, which had supported the slashing hypothesis for decades, rested on an exaggeration. Yes, cassowaries were dangerous. Yes, they could inflict serious injuries with their claws. But the specific claim that they regularly disemboweled prey or enemies, that simply wasn't supported by the evidence. Cassowaries use their claws defensively, in territorial disputes, and in aggressive displays. They kick and scratch, certainly, but the Hollywood vision of slashing open bellies didn't match the reality of cassowary behavior. The challenge to the slashing hypothesis came from multiple directions. In 2005, a team led by Philip Manning decided to actually test how the claw would perform. Working with a BBC documentary series, they constructed a robotic model of a Deinonychus foot, complete with hydraulically powered muscles and a realistic sickle claw. The experiment was simple but revealing. They took the robotic leg and attempted to slash through flesh, using a pig carcass as a stand-in for dinosaur meat. The results contradicted decades of assumption. The claw could puncture deeply, certainly. It was excellent at that. But it couldn't slice. It couldn't cut clean gashes through tissue. When they tried to drag the claw through flesh to create a slashing wound, the claw would stick, embed itself, refuse to move smoothly. The shape was wrong for slashing. The cross-section was wrong. Everything about the claw's construction made it a terrible knife. Manning and his colleagues published their findings. The claw, they argued, wasn't a slashing weapon at all. Instead, it functioned as a hook or grappling tool. They reconstructed the keratinous sheath that would have covered the bone in life, giving it an elliptical cross-section rather than the inverted teardrop shape that earlier researchers had assumed. With this shape, the claw made more sense as a piercing and gripping instrument, something to stab into prey and hold on, not something to slash with. Manning's team also discovered something fascinating about the mechanics of the grip. When they examined the foot tendons, they found evidence of a ratchet-like locking mechanism that would maintain a tight grip automatically once engaged. This meant that once a dromaeosaurid sank its claw into prey, the foot would lock in position without requiring continuous muscular effort. This discovery would later prove crucial for explaining one of the most famous dinosaur fossils ever found. But if the claw was a gripping tool, what was it gripping? One possibility was prey, obviously, but another, more intriguing possibility emerged from further analysis. Manning's team examined not just the foot claws, but also the hand claws of dromaeosaurids. They used X-ray imaging to create 3-dimensional maps of a velociraptor forelimb claw, examining how stress would distribute through the structure when it was used. For comparison, they analyzed claws from a modern predatory bird, the eagle owl. The results were striking. The dromaeosaurid claws showed a stress distribution pattern ideal for climbing. The sharpened tip functioned for puncturing and gripping, while the curved base helped transfer stress loads evenly along the claw's length. This was the signature of a climbing adaptation, not purely a weapon. To confirm this interpretation, the research team compared the curvature of dromaeosaurid sickle claws to the claws of modern birds and mammals with known lifestyles. Previous studies had established that claw curvature correlates with lifestyle. Animals with strongly curved claws of certain proportions tend to be climbers. Animals with straighter claws tend to be ground dwellers. When Manning's team measured the Deinonychus sickle claw, they found it had a curvature of 160 degrees. This fell squarely within the range typical of climbing animals. The forelimb claws showed similar curvatures, all consistent with an animal that spent significant time climbing. The climbing hypothesis made sense for small dromaeosaurids. Animals like Microraptor, roughly the size of a crow, living in forested environments, would benefit enormously from climbing ability. They could escape larger predators, access prey in trees, and potentially use elevation to launch into gliding flight. The sickle claw would be perfect for gripping bark, allowing them to scamper up trunks like modern tree squirrels, using all 4 limbs in coordinated climbing motions. Direct fossil evidence supports this interpretation. Microraptor specimens have been found with fish bones and bird remains preserved in their stomach areas, prey items most easily accessed through climbing and arboreal hunting. Modern analogs also support diverse uses of enlarged foot claws in smaller species. Secretary birds, for instance, use their elongated foot claws to skewer small prey like snakes and rodents, stabbing downward with considerable force. This offers another model for how small dromaeosaurids might have employed their sickle claws against appropriately sized victims. Interestingly, not all dromaeosaurids followed the standard pattern of a single enlarged sickle claw. Balar Bondoc, a Romanian dromaeosaurid, possessed two enlarged retractable claws, one on both the first and second toes. This variation demonstrates that dromaeosaurid foot weaponry evolved along multiple pathways, with different lineages experimenting with different configurations for similar functions. But the climbing hypothesis raised an obvious problem, one that paleontologist Peter Makowiecki was quick to point out. Small, primitive dromaeosaurids as tree climbers made perfect sense. But what about the giants? Achillobator measured around 6 meters in length. Utahraptor approached 7 meters and may have weighed over half a ton. These animals were far too large to climb trees. The physics simply wouldn't work. Tree trunks strong enough to support such weight wouldn't exist in their environments, and even if they did, the energy cost of hauling such bulk vertically would be prohibitive. Yet Achillobator and Utahraptor both retained highly curved sickle claws, identical in basic shape to those of their tiny tree-climbing relatives. Why? If the claw was purely a climbing adaptation, natural selection should have modified it in the giant species, straightening it out or reducing it. But it didn't. The giants kept their sickle claws, suggesting those claws served some function even in animals too large to climb. Makowiecki speculated that giant dromaeosaurids might have adapted the claw exclusively for prey capture, perhaps latching on to large prey animals. This brought the discussion back to predatory behavior, but with a different mechanism than slashing. Instead of cutting, the claw would anchor the predator to its victim. This idea received strong support from one of the most famous dinosaur fossils ever discovered. In 1971, a joint Polish-Mongolian expedition unearthed something extraordinary in the Gobi Desert: 2 dinosaurs, locked in what appeared to be mortal combat, preserved at the moment of their death. The specimen shows a velociraptor and a protoceratops intimately associated. The velociraptor's left foot, with its sickle claw, extends toward the throat of the protoceratops. The protoceratops, meanwhile, has clamped its beak down on the velociraptor's right forearm. Both animals apparently died in this position, possibly buried by a sudden sandstorm or a collapsing dune. The fighting dinosaurs, as the specimen became known, offered direct evidence of how the sickle claw was actually used. The claw wasn't slashing open the protoceratops's belly. It was thrust into the throat region, targeting vital structures like the jugular vein, carotid artery, or windpipe. This suggested a stabbing or puncturing attack strategy, not a slashing one. The velociraptor was trying to kill quickly by hitting critical weak points, using the claw as a dagger rather than a knife. The ratchet mechanism Manning had discovered helps explain another puzzle about this specimen. Why couldn't the velociraptor pull free when danger approached? The answer may lie in that automatic locking grip. Once the claw sank into the protoceratops's throat and the tendons engaged the ratchet mechanism, the velociraptor may have been physically unable to disengage quickly. The very feature that made the claw such an effective weapon also trapped the predator in a fatal embrace. Kenneth Carpenter, analyzing this specimen, pointed out that the thick abdominal skin and muscle of large prey would be difficult to slash without a specialized cutting surface. The inside edge of the sickle claw, when examined carefully, proved to be rounded rather than knife-sharp. Only the bony core of the claw is preserved in fossils. The keratinous sheath that covered it in life is lost. But if that sheath resembled anything like modern bird or mammal claws, it wouldn't have been especially sharp, certainly nothing like a blade. Stabbing into soft tissues like the throat made much more sense than trying to slash through the armored belly. In 2011, Denver Fowler and his colleagues proposed what they called the Raptor Prey Restraint, or RPR model. This hypothesis drew on detailed comparisons between dromaeosaurid feet and legs and those of modern birds of prey, eagles, hawks, and owls. Fowler found that the proportions and capabilities of dromaeosaurid feet closely matched those of raptorial birds, especially in terms of the enlarged second claw and the range of grasping motion. The RPR model works like this. A dromaeosaurid would leap onto its prey, much like an eagle attacks a rabbit. The predator's weight would knock the prey down or destabilize it. The sickle claws on both feet would sink into the prey, anchoring the dromaeosaurid in place. The bird-like grasping motion of the feet would maintain a tight grip, preventing the prey from escaping. Then, critically, the dromaeosaurid would begin feeding on the prey while it was still alive, using its teeth to tear flesh and inflict wounds. Death would come eventually from blood loss and organ failure, but not instantly from a killing blow. This model explained several anatomical features that had puzzled researchers. The arms, which could exert considerable force but were covered in long feathers, wouldn't be used primarily for grasping prey. Instead, they would flap, providing stability and balance while the dromaeosaurid perched atop a struggling victim. The long, stiffened tail would serve as a counterbalance, helping the predator maintain position. The jaws, relatively weak compared to some other theropods, wouldn't need to deliver crushing bites. They just needed to tear flesh from an immobilized target. In 2019, Peter Bishop conducted a sophisticated biomechanical analysis of Deinonychus foot musculature, modeling different possible behaviors to see which ones the anatomy best supported. He tested scenarios including slash kicking, hanging on to large prey, pouncing onto prey, piercing weak points, pinning smaller prey, intraspecific combat, and scratch digging. The analysis concluded that the musculature was optimized for pinning smaller prey and holding it down while feeding, exactly as the RPR model predicted. What emerges from all this research is a more complex picture than the simple slashing weapon of popular imagination. The sickle claw was certainly deadly, but not in the way movies depicted. It was a multi-purpose tool, adapted for several related functions, with different species emphasizing different uses based on their size and ecology. The pattern is clear when examined across the family. Small species like Microraptor, weighing just a kilogram or two, used the claw primarily for climbing trees to access arboreal prey and escape predators, with the stabbing function serving as a secondary hunting tool for dispatching small vertebrates. Medium-sized animals like Velociraptor, at 15 to 30 kilograms, balanced the functions more evenly. They were light enough to climb when necessary, particularly in their younger years, but heavy enough to employ the claws effectively as prey restraint weapons against similarly sized or larger victims. Giant species like Utahraptor, at 300 to 500 kilograms, were far too massive for climbing. For them, the sickle claw served exclusively as a weapon for prey restraint. Those massive talons, capable of gripping even large dinosaurs while the predator delivered devastating bites. The debate hasn't entirely settled. Each new discovery has the potential to shift our understanding. But the consensus has moved decisively away from the slashing weapon hypothesis toward a more nuanced appreciation of the sickle claw as a sophisticated adaptation for a complex hunting strategy, modified by natural selection to serve different primary functions across the size spectrum of Dromaeosaurid diversity. The claw that made Dromaeosaurids famous turns out to be even more interesting than we first imagined, revealing these animals as agile, versatile predators whose killing methods more closely resembled modern birds of prey than the monsters of science fiction. Chapter 3. Pack Hunting Behavior: Separating Jurassic Park Myths from Fossil Evidence. One of the most memorable scenes in Jurassic Park shows a group of velociraptors working together with frightening intelligence. They coordinate their attack, communicate with calls and gestures, test the electric fence systematically, and execute a flanking maneuver to trap their human prey. One raptor distracts from the front while another stalks from the side. It's terrifying cinema, and it's burned into the cultural consciousness. The image of coordinated raptor packs has become inseparable from how we think about dromaeosaurids. But does the fossil evidence actually support this portrayal? The idea that dromaeosaurids hunted in packs didn't originate with Hollywood. It came from legitimate paleontological research, specifically from discoveries made by John Ostrom and his colleagues in Montana. When Ostrom studied Deinonychus in the late 1960s and early 70s, he found something intriguing. At several sites, paleontologists had discovered the scattered remains of multiple Deinonychus individuals in close association with the skeleton of a much larger dinosaur, an ornithopod called Tenontosaurus. Tenontosaurus was a substantial animal, measuring around 7 meters in length and weighing perhaps a ton or more. A single Deinonychus, by contrast, stretched only about 3 meters long and weighed maybe 70 kilograms at most. The size disparity was dramatic. One Deinonychus attacking a healthy adult Tenontosaurus would be like a medium-sized dog attacking a horse. Possible, perhaps, but highly risky and unlikely to succeed. But what if they didn't hunt alone? What if multiple Deinonychus worked together, coordinating their attack to bring down prey far larger than any individual could handle? That would explain the fossil associations. Ostrom, examining these sites in the 1970s and 90s, proposed exactly this scenario. Multiple Deinonychus, working as a pack, attacked Tenontosaurus. Some of the attackers died in the struggle, killed by the desperate herbivore's thrashing tail or trampling feet. The dead predators were left behind with their victim, preserved together for millions of years. The hypothesis was compelling. It explained the fossil associations. It matched the intelligence suggested by the large brain cases of Dromaeosaurids. It aligned with observations of modern predators, where pack hunting allows smaller carnivores to tackle prey many times their size. Wolves, lions, hyenas, and even some birds hunt cooperatively, using coordination and communication to overwhelm animals no individual could subdue alone. When Maxwell and Ostrom published further support for this idea in 1995, they pointed to additional evidence. Isolated Deinonychus teeth were commonly found near Tenontosaurus remains. This suggested repeated predator-prey interactions. If Deinonychus regularly hunted Tenontosaurus, the teeth lost during feeding would accumulate at kill sites. The pattern seemed to fit pack hunting perfectly. The scientific community largely accepted this interpretation. Popular books repeated it. Museum displays showed groups of Deinonychus mobbing a Tenontosaurus. Artists created dramatic illustrations of coordinated attacks. By the time Jurassic Park arrived in 1993, the idea was scientific orthodoxy. The movie simply took an accepted theory and ran with it, adding cinematic embellishments but building on what paleontologists had proposed. Then researchers started looking more critically at the evidence. The cracks in the pack hunting hypothesis began to appear when scientists examined the behavior of modern animals more carefully. Dromaeosaurids, as archaeosaurids, are most closely related to two groups of living animals, crocodilians and birds. If we want to understand dromaeosaurid behavior, these modern relatives provide our best guide. And here's the problem. Almost no crocodilians hunt cooperatively. Crocodiles are formidable predators, and they sometimes gather in groups, but they don't coordinate attacks. When multiple crocodiles converge on prey, each acts independently, opportunistically. There's no strategy, no coordination, no pack tactics. Similarly, among birds, which are even closer relatives to dromaeosaurids, cooperative hunting is rare. Yes, some raptorial birds hunt in pairs occasionally, but true pack hunting with coordinated roles is essentially unknown. The modern animals most similar to dromaeosaurids don't hunt in packs. That doesn't prove dromaeosaurids didn't either. Evolution produces novelty after all, but it does mean we should examine the fossil evidence more carefully before assuming pack behavior. That examination came in 2007 when Brian Roach and Daniel Brinkman published a thorough reanalysis of the Deinonychus-Tenontosaurus associations. They looked at what those sites actually showed and compared it to modern analogs. The comparison they drew was to Komodo dragons, the large monitor lizards of Indonesia. Komodo dragons are solitary hunters. They don't coordinate attacks or work together to bring down prey, but they do sometimes gather in groups at carcasses. When a Komodo dragon kills a large animal like a water buffalo, other dragons in the area detect the opportunity and converge on the food source. What happens next isn't cooperation, it's competition. The dragons fight, sometimes viciously, over access to the meat. Larger individuals feed first and aggressively defend their position. Smaller dragons wait for opportunities, darting in to grab scraps when the bigger animals are distracted. If a small dragon gets too bold and approaches while a large one is feeding, the result can be fatal. This is called a feeding aggregation, and it's fundamentally different from pack hunting. Pack hunters work together before the kill, coordinating their attack, using teamwork to bring down prey. Feeding aggregations form after the kill, when multiple scavengers or opportunistic predators converge on an already dead carcass. Roach and Brinkman argued that the Deinonychus tenontosaurus sites looked more like feeding aggregations than pack hunting events. Here's what they found. The Deinonychus specimens from these sites were mostly young adults, not a mix of ages as you'd expect in a stable family group or pack. Many of the Deinonychus bones showed damage and missing parts. The missing pieces weren't randomly lost. They were the kind of elements that would be consumed by scavengers, the meaty bits, the nutritious pieces. Most tellingly, some of the Deinonychus bones showed tooth marks from other Deinonychus. This is evidence of cannibalism. The scenario that fits this evidence is grim but logical. A Tenontosaurus dies, perhaps killed by a single Deinonychus or perhaps dying of other causes. Other Deinonychus in the area are attracted to the carcass. They converge on it, not as a coordinated pack, but as competing individuals. Fights break out. Weaker individuals are killed and eaten along with the Tenontosaurus. The victors feed and move on. What's left are the bones of multiple Deinonychus mixed with those of the Tenontosaurus, looking for all the world like a pack that died together in battle. This reinterpretation made uncomfortable sense. It matched the behavior of living relatives. It explained the evidence better than pack hunting did, and it aligned with additional observations that had been troubling for the pack hunting hypothesis. For instance, multiple Deinonychus skeletons are actually quite rare. Most Deinonychus fossils are isolated individuals, not groups. If these animals lived and hunted in stable packs, we should find them preserved together more often. The rarity of multiple individuals at one site suggests that grouping was the exception, not the rule. The same pattern holds for other Dromaeosaurids. Velociraptor is one of the best-known Dromaeosaurids, with over a dozen described specimens from Mongolia. Despite this relatively rich fossil record, not a single find shows multiple Velociraptor individuals clearly associated as a group. The famous fighting dinosaur specimen shows one velociraptor with one protoceratops, not a pack attack. Every other significant velociraptor find represents a lone individual. If Velociraptor lived in packs, the probability of finding at least one pack preserved together would be substantial given the number of specimens known. The consistent pattern of isolated individuals suggests these animals spent most of their time alone or in very small groups, certainly not in the coordinated hunting packs of popular imagination. The strongest evidence for group behavior in Dromaeosaurids comes not from body fossils, but from fossil footprints. In 2007, Chinese paleontologists described an extensive trackway from Shandong province. The tracks were made by a large Dromaeosaurid, probably something similar in size to a kilobator, around the 5-meter range. The trackway showed 6 individuals, all roughly the same size, walking together along an ancient shoreline. The tracks were parallel, spaced about a meter apart, all heading in the same direction at a similar pace. The spacing and consistency strongly suggested these weren't random individuals whose paths happened to cross. They were moving as a group, deliberately staying together over a significant distance. This is important evidence for social behavior. These 6 Dromaeosaurids were tolerating each other's presence, moving together for some period of time. That's more than you'd expect from strictly solitary animals. Modern solitary predators don't usually move in groups unless there's a specific reason, like migration or mating season. But, and this is crucial, the trackway doesn't show hunting behavior. The animals were walking at a slow pace. There's no evidence of running, stalking, or attacking. No prey trackways are associated with the predator tracks. This could be a family group traveling together, perhaps a female with several subadult offspring. It could be a temporary aggregation during mating season. It could be several individuals moving through the same area for unrelated reasons, but choosing to stay together for safety or some other benefit.
What it definitely doesn't show is coordinated pack hunting. The animals weren't chasing prey, weren't positioning themselves for an ambush, weren't executing any kind of hunting strategy. They were simply walking. Similar trackways from other locations occasionally show 2 or 3 dromaeosaurid tracks moving in the same direction, but these are far less clear about whether the animals were actually together or just passing through the same area at different times. The Shandong trackway remains the only really convincing evidence that dromaeosaurids sometimes moved in groups. Another fossil locality has often been cited as evidence for pack behavior, the Utah Raptor megablock. This massive chunk of stone from Utah contains the remains of at least 6 Utah raptor individuals, along with the bones of a large iguanodontid. The concentration of predators with prey seems to suggest pack hunting, but when researchers looked more carefully, they found a different explanation. The sedimentology of the site indicates it was a muddy or boggy area, perhaps quicksand or a water hole with treacherous, sticky mud. The large herbivore probably became mired, stuck fast, unable to escape. Utah raptor individuals, attracted to the struggling prey, approached to feed, but they too became trapped in the same sticky substrate. More predators arrived, each one becoming stuck in turn. This is a classic predator trap, exactly analogous to the La Brea tar pits in California, where thousands of Pleistocene carnivores became trapped while trying to scavenge already stuck prey. Predator traps concentrate predator remains not because the predators were hunting together, but because they were independently drawn to the same irresistible opportunity. The difference is subtle but critical. Multiple predators at one location doesn't automatically mean cooperation. Modern examples reinforce this interpretation. At elephant carcasses in Africa, lions from different prides might feed on the same body, but they're not cooperating. They're tolerating each other's presence because the food source is large enough to share, but they maintain spacing, show aggressive displays, and would fight seriously if resources became scarce. Similarly, when a whale washes ashore, dozens of sharks might converge on the carcass without any coordination or cooperation. So where does this leave us? The evidence suggests dromaeosaurids were not the highly coordinated pack hunters of Jurassic Park. They probably didn't assign roles, didn't plan complex strategies, didn't work together with the seamless cooperation the movies portrayed. Most of the time, they were likely solitary or lived in very small groups, perhaps family units of a mother with young. However, they weren't strictly solitary either. The trackway evidence shows they could tolerate conspecifics and move together in groups when circumstances allowed. Feeding aggregations probably formed when large carcasses became available, drawing multiple individuals to feast. These gatherings would have involved competition and conflict, not cooperation, with larger, stronger individuals monopolizing the best feeding positions while smaller ones waited for scraps or risked injury trying to feed. Young dromaeosaurids probably stayed with their parents for some period after hatching. Evidence from related groups suggests dinosaurs showed at least some parental care, and dromaeosaurids likely did as well. A mother with several juveniles would constitute a small group, and these family units might account for some of the multiple individual finds and trackways. Seasonal aggregations are also possible. Many modern reptiles and birds that are otherwise solitary will gather during breeding season. Male dromaeosaurids might have established territories and competed with rivals. Females might have been selective about mates. These interactions would bring multiple individuals into proximity without requiring year-round pack living. The absence of pack hunting doesn't make dromaeosaurids less impressive as predators. A solitary velociraptor, using its intelligence, agility, and weaponry to hunt prey of similar or smaller size, was still a formidable animal. A lone Deinonychus, carefully stalking a juvenile Teninosaurus and using its sickle claws to deadly effect, would have been a highly successful predator. The coordinated pack assault was cinematic fiction, but the reality of a cunning, adaptable, opportunistic predator was perhaps even more interesting. What we've learned is that interpreting fossil evidence requires caution. The initial Deinonychus teninosaurus discoveries seem to clearly indicate pack hunting, and for decades that interpretation stood unchallenged. Only when researchers looked more carefully at modern analogs and examined the fossil associations in detail did the problems emerge. The same bones that suggested cooperation turned out to better support competition and cannibalism. This pattern reminds us that fossils don't come with behavior labels attached. We infer behavior from bones, tracks, and associations, and those inferences depend on our assumptions and the frameworks we use. When we assumed pack hunting was common among predators and looked at the fossils through that lens, we saw pack hunting. When we looked more carefully at what living relatives actually do and examined the taxonomy in detail, a different picture emerged. The Dromaeosaurids remain fascinating, but they're fascinating as real animals with complex behaviors that we're still working to understand, not as the simplified movie monsters of popular culture. The truth, as usual, is more nuanced than the myth, and ultimately more rewarding to explore.
Chapter 4. Thinking Predators. In 1922, when William Diller Matthew and Barnum Brown first examined the skull of Dromaeosaurus albercensis, they noted something unusual. The brain case was remarkably large for a reptile of that body size. They were looking at the physical signature of something that would take decades to fully appreciate. These predators were different from other dinosaurs in ways that went far beyond anatomy. They were fundamentally more intelligent. The revolution in understanding came through careful measurement. Scientists developed a metric called the encephalization quotient, or EQ, which compares brain size to body size, while accounting for the fact that brain size doesn't scale linearly with body mass. On this scale, most dinosaurs scored poorly, with EQ values between 0.1 and 2.0. Large sauropods, despite their massive bodies, had relatively tiny brains. Many armored dinosaurs and herbivorous ornithopods fell into this lower tier. Dromaeosaurids were different. When researchers calculated EQ values for various theropods using endocasts created from CT scans and direct examination of brain cases, they found something remarkable. Dromaeosaurids, along with their close relatives, the Troodontids, had EQ values as high as 5.8. The scale extends to 8.0, approximating the human brain. This placed Dromaeosaurids at a cognitive level closer to modern mammals than to typical reptiles. An EQ rating between 5.5 and 6.0 puts an animal in the same range as many predatory mammals. Modern cats, both domestic and wild, fall into this range. So do dogs, coyotes, and wolves, animals known for their problem-solving abilities, capacity to learn from experience, and sophisticated hunting strategies. Among the reptilian giants that dominated Mesozoic ecosystems, Dromaeosaurids stood apart as genuinely intelligent animals. The brain structure itself revealed specialization. Studies of endocasts showed not just larger overall brain size, but specific enlargement of the cerebellum and related regions, controlling motor coordination and spatial awareness. The brain architecture followed an avian-type pattern rather than a mammalian one, with different regions handling similar functions through distinct neural pathways. Finite element analysis and X-ray tomography of well-preserved skulls revealed how brain structure integrated with sensory organs, showing coordinated strain patterns during feeding and sensory processing that indicated these systems worked together as an integrated whole. What did this intelligence enable? Consider the challenge facing a dromaeosaurid predator. Most herbivorous dinosaurs had EQ ratings well below 1.0. A Tenontosaurus, a Protoceratops, the various hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, these animals were cognitively outmatched. A dromaeosaurid could outthink its prey in ways that mattered for survival. It could remember locations of game trails, water sources, and ambush sites. It could recognize individual prey animals and remember which were young, old, sick, or injured. It could learn from failed attacks and adjust tactics accordingly. This intelligence was particularly valuable for solitary hunters. Pack hunters can sometimes succeed through numbers, even with limited individual intelligence, but a solitary predator needs to be smart. It needs to choose targets carefully, approach without detection, strike at the right moment. The enhanced cerebellum gave dromaeosaurids the coordination of a cat or bird of prey, allowing them to execute maneuvers impossible for less neurologically sophisticated dinosaurs, leaping onto prey, maintaining balance on a struggling victim, coordinating movements of arms, legs, and tail while delivering precise bites. But intelligence only works when paired with good sensory input, and dromaeosaurids had exceptional sensory systems. The skulls show large orbits, indicating large eyes that gathered more light and formed sharper images.
More importantly, the eyes faced forward. Not completely, not to the extent seen in owls or primates, but noticeably more frontal than in most dinosaurs. This created a substantial zone of binocular overlap where both eyes could focus on the same target, enabling precise depth perception. A velociraptor tracking a small mammal could judge distance precisely, timing its pounce to land exactly where the prey would be, the difference between success and failure in high-speed predation. The vision capabilities extended to activity patterns. Researchers studying scleral rings, the structures of small bones supporting the eyeball, uncovered something unexpected. By measuring these rings and comparing proportions to living birds and reptiles, scientists working in studies published around 2011 and 2021 could infer whether an extinct animal was active during day, night, or some combination.
When this analysis was applied to Velociraptor, the results pointed clearly to nocturnal activity, with eye proportions adapted for gathering maximum light in low-light conditions. This made biological sense. Many small mammals living alongside Velociraptor were likely nocturnal, hiding during the day and emerging at night to forage. A nocturnal dromaeosaurid could access prey that daytime predators missed entirely. Linharaptor, a close relative from the same region and time period, showed similar adaptations. Microraptor initially showed similar patterns, but with a complication. This species preserved evidence of iridescent plumage, feathers that shimmer with structural colors. Among modern birds, no nocturnal species displays iridescent plumage because such visual displays serve no purpose in darkness. This suggests either that Microraptor was cathemeral, active in short bursts throughout day and night when display would be visible, or that our interpretation methods need refinement. Indeed, when researchers examined Sinornithosaurus using the same techniques, it showed cathemeral patterns, hunting opportunistically whenever prey presented itself. Dromaeosaurus and Sagan showed less extreme adaptations, possibly indicating diurnal or crepuscular activity. This diversity in activity patterns allowed different dromaeosaurid species living in the same environments to partition their hunting times, reducing competition. One species hunts by day, another by night, another at twilight, each accessing different prey active at different times. Hearing was equally crucial. Studies of endocasts revealed details about inner ear structures, particularly the cochlear duct that processes sound. In Velociraptor, the cochlear duct was elongated, indicating ability to detect and process a wide range of sound frequencies, from about 2,368 Hz to 3,965 Hz. This range encompassed sounds made by small prey animals, the rustling of leaves, scampering of tiny feet, squeaks and chirps of mammals and smaller dinosaurs. A hunting dromaeosaurid could locate prey it couldn't yet see, tracking a hidden mammal through undergrowth by sound alone. The elongated cochlear duct had another implication, connecting to parental care. Throughout archaeosaur evolution, the cochlea has elongated in patterns correlating with ability to hear high-pitched sounds, specifically high-pitched calls of juveniles. Modern birds with extended parental care need to hear their chicks calling from the nest. The elongated cochlear ducts in dromaeosaurids suggest they too could hear high-frequency vocalizations, meaning young dromaeosaurids called to their parents, and those parents responded to maintain contact. This auditory capability would have been essential for family groups, allowing adults to locate offspring by sound, even when separated, supporting the interpretation that dromaeosaurids engaged in extended parental care beyond simple nest guarding. The sense of smell rounded out the sensory arsenal. Studies of olfactory bulbs showed that dromaeosaurids had well-developed olfactory systems. When researchers compared relative size of olfactory bulbs across different theropods and modern birds, they found dromaeosaurids fell into the same range as tyrannosaurs and modern turkey vultures, animals known for acute sense of smell. Detailed measurements of nasal cavity volume in well-preserved specimens of Velociraptor, Bambiraptor, and Sauronortholestes revealed something more specific. These dromaeosaurids had higher nasal volume to body mass ratios than other maniraptorans.
The larger nasal cavities provided more surface area for olfactory receptors, the cells that detect scent molecules, translating to a more sensitive nose capable of detecting faint odors over considerable distances. For a hunting dromaeosaurid, smell would have been invaluable. The scent of a carcass could be detected from far away. The scent of prey, even hidden from view, would betray its presence. Different prey species would have distinctive scents, allowing the predator to identify what it was tracking before visual contact. How did these senses work together? Imagine a velociraptor hunting at dusk in a Cretaceous forest. Visual acuity begins with detection of movement, those forward-facing eyes catching the flicker of motion in underbrush. The brain processes visual information, calculates distance and trajectory using binocular vision, and initiates pursuit. As the predator runs, its ears track sounds of fleeing prey, updating the brain on changes in direction even when vegetation blocks visual contact. The nose provides confirmation, the scent verifying it's the right target, worth the energy expenditure of the chase.
The predator closes in, and integration of senses becomes crucial. The brain coordinates input from eyes, ears, and proprioception, the internal sense of body position. The muscles receive precisely timed commands. The leap is launched at the optimal moment, the sickle claws extend, and the predator lands exactly where the prey will be because the brain calculated the intercept perfectly using all available information. This is calculated, intelligent hunting by an animal whose brain can process multiple information streams simultaneously, weigh options, predict outcomes, and execute complex motor programs with precision. The metabolic cost of running such a sophisticated nervous system was substantial. Large brains require significant energy to operate, and complex sensory organs are energetically expensive to build and maintain. This is one more line of evidence pointing to dromaeosaurid endothermy. Only a warm-blooded animal with a high metabolic rate could afford to run such advanced neural hardware. Recent computed tomography studies of nasal cavity volumes and thermoregulatory efficiency from 2023 suggest that dromaeosaurids, while endothermic, had less efficient nasal heat exchange than modern birds, but more efficient than typical reptiles. Their metabolic rate was probably lower than modern birds of comparable size, but still much higher than reptiles. This intermediate state makes sense for animals that were evolutionarily intermediate between reptiles and birds, possessing advanced features but not yet having evolved the full suite of avian specializations. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of dromaeosaurids as the most cognitively sophisticated predators of the Mesozoic. They thought better, saw better, heard better, and smelled better than nearly everything they encountered. The herbivores they hunted were not helpless. They had size, armor, weapons, or herding behaviors for protection, but they faced predators who could outthink them. The intelligence and sensory capabilities of dromaeosaurids demonstrate that evolution doesn't follow a single pathway to success. While mammals were evolving their own sophisticated brains in the shadows of the Mesozoic world, remaining small and mostly nocturnal, dromaeosaurids had already achieved remarkable cognitive abilities through a completely different evolutionary route. Their brains followed avian-type architecture rather than mammalian patterns, but they worked effectively for the tasks these animals needed to accomplish. The question of how far dromaeosaurid intelligence might have evolved had the asteroid not struck 66 million years ago remains necessarily speculative, though the trajectory they were on suggests the potential for continued cognitive advancement was certainly present. Chapter 5. From Crow to Crocodile. Walk through the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago or the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and you'll encounter a striking paradox in the dromaeosaurid displays. In one case sits a delicate skeleton, barely larger than a crow. A few meters away looms a mounted skeleton that dwarfs a standing adult human. Both are dromaeosaurids, both members of the same family, yet they differ in size by more than an order of magnitude. This extraordinary range, from animals weighing less than a kilogram to giants approaching 1,000 kilograms, represents one of the most remarkable patterns of size diversity in any dinosaur family. The story of dromaeosaurid size begins with the smallest members, creatures that challenge our preconceptions about what a predatory dinosaur could be. For years, paleontologists assumed that medium-sized forms represented something close to the lower size limit for the group.
Then, discoveries from China and North America revealed that Dromaeosaurids could be far, far smaller. Mahakala omnogave, discovered in Mongolia and described in 2007, holds the distinction of being the smallest and most primitive dromaeosaurid ever found. The animal measured a mere 70 centimeters from nose to tail, about the length of a large house cat, though its build was lighter and more gracile. Mahakala weighed perhaps 600 to 700 grams, less than 2 pounds. To put that in perspective, a typical chicken weighs more than twice as much. The tiny skeleton of Mahakala revealed something profound about dromaeosaurid evolution. This wasn't a juvenile. The bones showed fusion patterns indicating skeletal maturity. This was a fully grown adult, reproductively capable, representing what dromaeosaurids looked like near the very beginning of their evolutionary history. The discovery suggested that the common ancestor of all dromaeosaurids, troodontids, and birds, the animal paleontologists call the ancestral Paravian, was similarly diminutive, measuring around 65 centimeters and weighing in the range of 600 to 700 grams. Microraptor, perhaps the most famous small dromaeosaurid, wasn't much larger. Multiple species have been assigned to this genus, with the first described in 2000. These animals were small, lightweight creatures built for life in the trees, and possibly for gliding between them. The four-winged Microraptor gui reached lengths of about 80 centimeters, but remained featherweight, with mass estimates between 200 to 600 grams. These tiny predators occupied a completely different ecological niche than their larger relatives. At their size, they weren't hunting other dinosaurs. They were pursuing insects, small mammals, lizards, and other small vertebrates. Direct evidence confirms this diet. One Microraptor specimen was found with the bones of a small fish preserved in its stomach region. Another contained the remains of a bird, demonstrating that these little dromaeosaurids were quite capable of catching flying prey, either snatching birds from the air during gliding attacks or ambushing them at rest.
North America had its own tiny dromaeosaurid, though its existence remained hidden for decades. In 1982, a partial skeleton was collected from the Dinosaur Park Formation in Alberta, Canada. The fossil sat unstudied in museum collections for 25 years, its significance unrecognized. When Nicholas Longrich and Philip Currie finally prepared and described it in 2009, they realized what they had: the smallest carnivorous dinosaur ever found in North America. They named it Hesperonychus elizabethae. The holotype consisted of a pelvic girdle, and despite the specimen's diminutive size, the bones were fully coossified, fused together in a way that only happens in mature adults. By calculating body mass from the proportions of the pubis, researchers estimated this individual weighed approximately 1,900 grams, about half the weight of a domestic cat. The animal was probably close to a meter in length, though without more complete skeletal material, the estimate carries uncertainty. What made Hesperonychus particularly significant was not just its size, but what it revealed about dromaeosaurid diversity. When Longrich and Currie analyzed its relationships, they found it wasn't closely related to the other North American dromaeosaurids. Instead, it belonged to the Microraptorinae, the group of small, basal dromaeosaurids previously known only from the early Cretaceous of China. Here was a Microraptorine in the late Cretaceous of North America, extending the temporal range of the clade by 45 million years and demonstrating that these tiny predators had achieved a global distribution. The discovery prompted paleontologists to re-examine museum collections with fresh eyes. What they found was revealing. Isolated pedal phalanges, the toe bones of dromaeosaurids, had been collected from various sites in the Dinosaur Park and Oldman formations of Alberta. These bones had been recognized as dromaeosaurid, but were assumed to belong to juveniles of larger species. Now, with Hesperonychus as a reference, researchers could see that many of these tiny toe bones actually belonged to small adult dromaeosaurids, not juvenile large ones. The anatomical differences were subtle but definitive, particularly in the shape and proportions of features related to the sickle claw. This realization transformed our understanding of late Cretaceous ecosystems in North America. The small carnivore niche, which had appeared vacant, was actually occupied by tiny dromaeosaurids that had simply been overlooked in the fossil record. These weren't rare animals.
The number of isolated small dromaeosaurid bones in Alberta collections suggested they were actually quite common, perhaps even more numerous than the larger species. Between these tiny forms and the giants sat the medium-sized dromaeosaurids, the species most familiar to the public. Velociraptor mongoliensis, the star of Jurassic Park, despite being wildly inaccurately portrayed, represents this middle ground. Adult velociraptors measured between 1.5 and just over 2 meters in length, with most specimens clustering around 1.8 meters. Weight estimates range from 14 to nearly 20 kilograms, roughly the size of a large turkey or small dog.
Deinonychus antiropus, the species whose discovery revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur biology, was notably larger, measuring roughly 3 meters long and weighing in the range of 70 kilograms. Deinonychus was wolf-sized, a substantial predator fully capable of tackling prey larger than itself. The robustness of its skeleton, the powerful build of its legs and feet, all indicate an animal designed for high-impact predation. Dromaeosaurus albertensis, the animal that gave the family its name, fell into a similar size range, at around 2 meters in length and weighing approximately 40 kilograms. What's striking about Dromaeosaurus is how lightly built it was compared to what an equally long mammalian predator would be. A Bengal tiger of the same length would weigh 150 to 180 kilograms, nearly 4 times heavier. This comparison highlights the fundamental difference in skeletal architecture between dinosaurs and mammals, with dinosaurs achieving length without corresponding mass. Saurnitholestes langstoni, another North American species from the Dinosaur Park Formation, measured roughly 1.8 meters and weighed approximately 10 kilograms. These medium-sized species represent what might be called the default dromaeosaurid body plan, the size range where the family's characteristic adaptations worked most efficiently for their hunting strategies. But evolution pushed in other directions as well. At least 3 times in dromaeosaurid history, lineages evolved dramatically increased body size, producing giants that dwarfed their relatives. The first of these gigantic forms to be discovered was Utahraptor ostromorum maiorum, found in the early Cretaceous Cedar Mountain Formation of Utah. When James Kirkland, Robert Gaston, and Donald Burge described it in 1993, they immediately recognized they had something unprecedented. The fossils belonged to a dromaeosaurid that approached 7 meters in length and weighed an estimated 400 to 500 kilograms, comparable in mass to a large male lion. The sickle claw alone testified to the animal's enormous proportions. While a velociraptor's sickle claw measured about 6.5 centimeters around its outer edge, Utahraptor's claw exceeded 23 centimeters, nearly 9.5 inches. This wasn't a scalpel, this was a meat hook, capable of sinking deep into large prey and holding fast. Even more remarkable specimens sit in the collections at Brigham Young University. These Utahraptor fossils belong to individuals that may have reached 11 meters in length. They await detailed study, but if the size estimates hold up, they would make Utahraptor one of the largest predatory dinosaurs in its ecosystem, rivaling some of the medium-sized tyrannosauroids. In 2015, another North American giant emerged from the fossil record. Robert De Palma and colleagues described Dakotaraptor steini from the Hell Creek Formation of South Dakota. This animal lived right at the end of the Cretaceous, sharing its world with Tyrannosaurus rex. Dakotaraptor measured approximately 5.5 meters in length, making it the largest dromaeosaurid from the Hell Creek. The specimen showed clear evidence of feathers. Preserved on the forearm bones were quill knobs. Those telltale bumps were major wing feathers attached. This made Dakotaraptor one of the largest feathered dinosaurs known, demonstrating that even dromaeosaurids approaching the size of large crocodiles retained elaborate plumage. Though subsequent research questioned whether the specimen might be a chimera, bones from multiple animals mistakenly associated as one individual, the core material, including the feather-bearing forearm, appears genuine. Asia produced its own giants. A Kilobator giganticus from Mongolia measured around 6 meters and possessed a heavily built skeleton that emphasized power over speed.
Unlike the more gracile velociraptor from the same general region, Achillobator was stocky and robust, with shortened leg proportions that sacrificed running speed for sheer strength. The sickle claw, while not as proportionally large as in smaller species, still represented a formidable weapon at absolute size. South America revealed yet another lineage of large dromaeosaurids. Ostroraptor pubazzi, described from Argentina in 2008, represented the southern continent's contribution to dromaeosaurid gigantism. This animal measured 5 to 6 meters long and belonged to the Unenlagiinae, a group of basal dromaeosaurids previously known only from smaller species. Ostroraptor showed unusual proportions for a large dromaeosaurid, particularly in its skull, which was elongated and narrow with small teeth, suggesting a diet that differed from the large prey items targeted by giants like Utahraptor. The repeated evolution of large body size across separate dromaeosaurid lineages reveals an important pattern. Large size wasn't a single evolutionary event inherited from a common giant ancestor. Instead, it evolved independently at least 3 times, once in the Dromaeosauran lineage that produced Utahraptor, Achillobator, and possibly Dromaeosaurus itself, once in the South American Unlagogenines that gave rise to Ostroraptor, and possibly a 3rd time in a Velociraptor-Rhenae lineage represented by isolated teeth from the Isle of Wight in England. These teeth, belonging to an animal roughly the size of Utahraptor, show morphological features associating them with Velociraptor-Rhenaes rather than Dromaeosaurans. If this identification is correct, it suggests that even the typically medium-sized Velociraptor-Rhenae lineage occasionally produced giants, though we lack skeletal material to confirm the animal's body proportions. What allowed Dromaeosaurids to span such an enormous size range? Part of the answer lies in the versatility of their basic body plan. The fundamental dromaeosaurid bow plan, with its grasping hands, sickle-clawed feet, and balanced tail, proved adaptable across a vast spectrum of body sizes. A microraptor, weighing less than a pound, could use essentially the same hunting strategy as a Utahraptor, weighing 1,000 times more, just scaled to different prey. But scaling isn't simple. As animals grow larger, their proportions must change to accommodate the physics of increasing mass. This principle, called allometry, manifested in several ways in large dromaeosaurids. The limb bones became proportionally more robust, thickening to support greater weight. In Utahraptor and Achillobator, the femur was noticeably shorter relative to the tibia than in smaller dromaeosaurids. This shift in the femur-to-tibia ratio reduced leg length relative to body size and moved these animals away from the fast-running adaptations seen in their smaller relatives. The metatarsals, the long bones of the foot, also became proportionally thicker and shorter, trading the gracile, spring-like quality of a velociraptor's foot for the robust, weight-bearing structure needed to support a half-ton predator. The skull, too, changed with size. Large dromaeosaurids, like Achillobator and Utahraptor, possessed deeper, more massive skulls than their smaller relatives, with proportionally larger muscle attachment sites indicating stronger jaw muscles capable of delivering more powerful bites. The skull became less of a lightweight precision instrument and more of a robust bone-crushing tool. This made sense given their likely prey. A velociraptor hunting rabbit-sized mammals needed a different killing strategy than a Utahraptor confronting an iguanodontid weighing several tons. The ecological implications of this size diversity were profound. In a single ecosystem, multiple dromaeosaurid species of different sizes could coexist by partitioning resources. Small species hunted small prey, mammals, lizards, birds. Medium-sized species targeted juvenile dinosaurs and larger vertebrates. Giant species could challenge prey that smaller predators couldn't safely attack. This niche partitioning reduced direct competition and allowed greater species diversity than would be possible if all dromaeosaurids were the same size. In the late Cretaceous of North America, this pattern was clearly visible. Tiny Hesperonychus scurried through the underbrush of the Dinosaur Park Formation, pursuing insects and small vertebrates. Medium-sized Sauronitholestes hunted in more open areas, taking juveniles of the abundant Hadrosaurids and Ceratopsians. In the latest Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation, giant Dakotaraptor filled a large predator role, though it lived in the shadow of the truly enormous Tyrannosaurus rex. The shift from small ancestral forms to the diversity of sizes we see in later Dromaeosaurids represents about 100 million years of evolution. Mahakala, from the early Cretaceous, shows us the starting point, a tiny, possibly arboreal predator weighing less than a modern crow. Over tens of millions of years, different lineages explored different size ranges, some remaining small, others growing to medium size, and a few exploding into true giants. Why did some lineages grow large while others remained small? The answer likely involves a combination of ecological opportunity and evolutionary constraint. In ecosystems with abundant large prey and relatively few large predators, natural selection would favor size increase among the predators capable of exploiting that resource. The early Cretaceous environments where Utahraptor lived, for instance, lacked the massive tyrannosaurids that would later dominate large predator niches. This opened ecological space for a giant dromaeosaurid. But size increase carries costs: longer generation times, smaller population sizes, greater food requirements, and increased vulnerability to environmental changes. Small dromaeosaurids could reproduce more quickly, maintain larger populations, and survive on prey that larger species would ignore as not worth the effort. Each size class represented a different evolutionary bet, a different strategy for survival. The end result was a family of predators spanning the size range from the smallest birds to large crocodiles, each size class optimized for different prey and different hunting strategies, together constituting one of the most successful predatory radiations in the age of dinosaurs. Chapter 6. From Pole to Pole. When paleontologists map the locations where dromaeosaurid fossils have been found, a remarkable pattern emerges. From the frozen badlands of Alaska's North Slope to the windswept deserts of Patagonia, from the fossil beds of Mongolia's Gobi Desert to the limestone quarries of Denmark, from the sandstones of Montana to the ancient rocks of Madagascar, dromaeosaurids left their mark on every continent except Australia and Antarctica. Actually, that's not quite true. Fragmentary remains has been recovered from Antarctica as well. The only major landmass that hasn't yielded definitive dromaeosaurid fossils is Australia, though even there, isolated teeth hint that these predators may have prowled the ancient southern continent. These teeth are the only evidence, and such fragmentary material makes any conclusions about Australian dromaeosaurids highly uncertain. This cosmopolitan distribution raises profound questions. How did these animals spread so widely? When did different lineages reach different continents? And what can their distribution patterns tell us about the changing geography of the Mesozoic world? The story begins earlier than most people realize. While the oldest definitive body fossils of dromaeosaurids come from the early Cretaceous, isolated teeth push the timeline back much further. In 1992, paleontologists working in Gloucestershire, England, announced the discovery of dromaeosaurid teeth from the Middle Jurassic Bathonian stage, dating to approximately 167 million years ago. The teeth came from the Chipping Norton Limestone Formation, a marine deposit that occasionally preserved terrestrial material washed in from nearby land. These weren't complete skeletons. They were just teeth. Small and serrated, but with distinctive characteristics that clearly marked them as dromaeosaurid. The teeth were enough to establish that dromaeosaurids existed far earlier than anyone had suspected, in the middle of the Jurassic period, tens of millions of years before the famous late Cretaceous species like Velociraptor and Deinonychus. Similar teeth emerged from other Middle Jurassic sites. In Germany, the Oker locality in Lower Saxony yielded dromaeosaurid teeth from late Jurassic deposits. Portugal produced comparable material. Each find pushed back the known range of the family and confirmed that dromaeosaurids were well established by the late Jurassic, probably widespread even then, though their body fossils remained tantalizingly absent from rocks of that age. Then came an unexpected discovery from Ethiopia. In 1999, Mark Goodwin and colleagues described teeth from the Tithonian stage of the late Jurassic, found in what had been the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. These weren't just significant because of their age, they were significant because of where they were. Ethiopia in the late Jurassic was part of the southern landmass, separated from the northern continents by the Tethys Sea. If Dromaeosaurids were present in both Laurasia, the northern supercontinent, and Gondwana, the southern one, it meant the family had achieved a trans-global distribution, while the world's geography was radically different from today.
This evidence pointed to a conclusion that would reshape our understanding of Dromaeosaurid origins. The family must have evolved before the breakup of Pangaea, or at least very early in that breakup, when land connections between North and South still existed. They weren't a late Cretaceous development that happened to spread widely. They were an ancient lineage, present from almost the beginning of the Jurassic, with over 100 million years of evolutionary history stretching from their origins to their extinction. By the early Cretaceous, Dromaeosaurids had definitely reached Europe. The most compelling evidence comes from Denmark, specifically the island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea. In 2000, a geology student named Eliza Jarl Estrup found a single theropod tooth during a field course in the Juttegard Formation. When the tooth was studied carefully, it proved to be Dromaeosaurid, and in 2003, Per Christensen and Niels Bonde named it Dromaeosaurides bornholmensis.
This discovery carried special significance beyond paleontology. Dromaeosaurides was the first dinosaur ever discovered on Danish territory, a finding that captured national attention. The specimen was officially certified as Dane Kray, Denmark's national treasure designation, recognizing its cultural and scientific importance to the nation. Dating to approximately 140 million years ago in the Bariacean stage, it was also the first definitive dromaeosaurid from the early Cretaceous of Europe. The tooth measured nearly 22 millimeters long, with fine serrations and characteristics matching those of Dromaeosaurus from North America, despite being separated by an ocean and tens of millions of years. A second tooth found in 2008 confirmed the presence of this species in the ancient coastal lagoon environment preserved in those Danish rocks. The Bornholm discovery highlighted an important point. During the early Cretaceous, Europe was an archipelago, a scattering of islands in a shallow sea. Dromaeosaurids somehow reached these islands and thrived there, hunting the fish, turtles, and smaller dinosaurs that shared their environment. This suggested these animals were more capable of dispersing across water barriers than their terrestrial lifestyle might suggest, perhaps swimming between islands or crossing on temporary land bridges exposed during sea level fluctuations. North America and Asia dominated the Dromaeosaurid fossil record, particularly in the late Cretaceous. The spectacular specimens from Mongolia's Gobi Desert, particularly from the Jadokta Formation, demonstrated that Dromaeosaurids flourished in the arid environments of Central Asia. Multiple velociraptor skeletons have been recovered from these deposits, preserving details of anatomy impossible to glean from fragmentary remains. The slightly younger deposits of northern China, especially the Jehol group, with its exceptionally preserved feathered dinosaurs from formations like the Yixian, showed that Dromaeosaurids thrived in very different environments, the lakeside forests where volcanic ash periodically buried entire ecosystems. Meanwhile, in North America, Dromaeosaurid fossils poured from the rocks of the western interior. Montana's Cloverleaf Formation yielded Deinonychus. Alberta's Dinosaur Park Formation produced Dromaeosaurus and Sauronitholestes. Utah's Cedar Mountain Formation held Utahraptor. South Dakota's Hell Creek Formation preserved Dakotaraptor. New Mexico's Nashue member of the Ojo Alamo Formation revealed Dinobellator. The list went on, site after site, formation after formation, species after species. This rich North American and Asian record made sense geographically. During much of the Cretaceous, these two continents were connected, or nearly so. The Bering Land Bridge, which would later allow humans to migrate from Asia to the Americas, existed in various forms throughout the Mesozoic. North America and Asia formed a single biogeographic realm, allowing animals to disperse freely between them. The discovery of Hesperonychus in the late Cretaceous of Alberta, belonging to the Microraptorinae, previously known only from early Cretaceous China, perfectly illustrated this connection. Here was a lineage that originated in Asia and successfully dispersed to North America, maintaining its presence over tens of millions of years. But the southern continents told a different and more mysterious story. When Fernanda Novas and Pablo Puerta described Unenlagia comoensis from Argentina in 1997, they recognized it as a dromaeosaurid, but an unusual one. The skeleton showed a mosaic of primitive and derived features. The arms were long and powerful, with clear adaptations for wing function, yet the animal was almost certainly too large to fly. The hips showed a vertical rather than retroverted pubis, different from most northern dromaeosaurids. More South American discoveries followed. New Cuenca raptor, Argentinus, came from the same region and geological formation. Buitraraptor gonzalesorum, described in 2005, was smaller and more gracile, with a long, narrow snout packed with tiny teeth, very different from the blade-like teeth of most dromaeosaurids. These species were joined by Austroraptor, another member of this southern group.
These South American species shared enough features that they were grouped together as Unenlagianae, but were they truly dromaeosaurids? The question remains contentious. Some Paravean fossils found in southern continents have been traditionally regarded as dromaeosaurids, but have recently been reinterpreted as a unique family, Unenlagiadae, positioned outside Dromaeosauridae entirely. Other analyses place them within Dromaeosauridae as a basal subfamily. Still others suggest they might be members of Avialae, closer to birds than to Velociraptor and its relatives. The uncertainty reflects real ambiguity in their anatomy, a mixture of features that places them precisely at one of the most contentious boundaries in theropod phylogeny. Madagascar added another piece to the Gondwanan puzzle. Rhinovavis ostromi, discovered in the late Cretaceous deposits of the island, was initially described as a bird in 1998. The specimen showed clear evidence of flight adaptations, including powerful wing bones with quill knobs for feather attachment. But subsequent analyses revealed it was more likely an Unenlagiine that retained flight capabilities, or something so close to the bird-dromaeosaura boundary that classification became almost arbitrary. The pattern was intriguing. All these southern hemisphere forms, from Argentina and Madagascar, shared characteristics with each other that differed from northern dromaeosaurids. They formed a coherent group, united by features of the skull, pelvis, and hind limbs. The most parsimonious explanation was that they represented a distinct southern lineage that had been evolving independently since the breakup of Gondwana from Laurasia. When did that split occur? Pangaea began fragmenting in the Jurassic, but the process was gradual. Land connections between North and South persisted well into the early Cretaceous in some regions. The Ethiopian teeth from the late Jurassic suggested dromaeosaurids were present on both supercontinents before the split was complete. This meant the family predated the division, spreading across Pangaea when it was still a continuous landmass. As Gondwana separated and drifted south, the dromaeosaurids living there became isolated. They continued evolving, but along their own trajectory, accumulating unique features that distinguished them from their northern cousins. Tens of millions of years of separation produced the Unenlagines, assuming they are indeed dromaeosaurids, a distinctly Gondwanan radiation adapted to southern environments and southern prey. This hypothesis of an ancient north-south split is elegant and well supported, but it faces challenges. Some analyses fail to recover Unenlaginae as a monophyletic group, instead scattering its members across different parts of the Paravian family tree. And there are anomalies. Shanag Achille, described from the early Cretaceous of Mongolia, shows features that some researchers interpret as Unenlagine characteristics. If Shanag truly belongs to this supposedly Gondwanan lineage, it would mean Unenlagines weren't restricted to the southern continents after all, complicating the biogeographic story considerably. The Arctic provided yet another surprise. In the early 21st century, paleontologists working in Alaska's Prince Creek Formation began finding dinosaur remains at latitudes above 70 degrees north. This was the Arctic in the Cretaceous, a land experiencing months of winter darkness each year, even though the climate was much warmer than today. And among the fossils were dromaeosaurid teeth. The Alaska dromaeosaurids remain incompletely known.
identified primarily from isolated teeth rather than associated skeletons. But their presence at such high latitudes demonstrated that these animals could thrive in polar conditions, experiencing seasonal light regimes unlike anything most dinosaurs encountered. The teeth suggest animals similar in size to Sauronortholestes, medium-sized predators hunting the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians that formed enormous polar herds, enduring long polar winters in total darkness. The Arctic finds carried implications beyond just adding another region to the distribution map. The Arctic may have functioned as a crucial corridor for faunal exchange. When sea levels fell or tectonic activity created temporary land bridges, the high northern latitudes offered a route between Asia and North America that avoided more southern barriers. Dromaeosaurids moving through these corridors would have had to adapt, at least temporarily, to polar conditions, including those months of perpetual darkness. The fact that they successfully did so speaks to their physiological flexibility and ecological adaptability. Antarctica, the ultimate southern extreme, has yielded only fragmentary dromaeosaurid material. In 2007, Judd Case and colleagues reported a dromaeosaurid from the Maastrichtian of James Ross Island. The specimens were incomplete, making definitive identification difficult, but they confirmed that dromaeosaurids reached even the Antarctic Peninsula in the final million years of the Cretaceous. Europe in the late Cretaceous, an archipelago fragmented by high sea levels, somehow maintained dromaeosaurid populations on at least some of its islands. France produced Pyroraptor olympius and Veroraptor mechanorum from the late Cretaceous, both known from limited material, but clearly dromaeosaurid. The Isle of Wight in England yielded teeth from a giant velociraptorine, an animal approaching the size of the largest northern dromaeosaurids. What emerges from this global distribution is a picture of dromaeosaurids as remarkably successful dispersers and colonizers. Starting from Pangaean origins in the Middle or even early Jurassic, they spread across the ancient supercontinent. As that landmass fragmented, dromaeosaurid populations on each separating piece continued evolving independently, producing the distinct faunas we see in the late Cretaceous. Northern continents, connected through the Arctic and Beringia, maintained faunal exchange that kept their dromaeosaurid populations relatively similar, with lineages like the Microraptorine members appearing on both continents. Southern continents, isolated by seaways, developed their own unique lineages, though whether these truly represent dromaeosaurids or a separate radiation remains uncertain. But isolation was never complete. Occasional dispersal events allowed dromaeosaurids to reach islands, to cross water barriers, to penetrate into new regions, and colonize new habitats. Each successful colonization event created an opportunity for evolutionary divergence, for adaptation to local conditions and local prey, for the development of new species and potentially new lineages. The biogeographic mysteries remain. We still don't fully understand the relationships among the various dromaeosaurid subgroups, which means our biogeographic interpretations rest on uncertain phylogenetic foundations. The southern hemisphere lineages particularly remain contentious, with different analyses producing conflicting results about whether they even belong in Dromaeosauridae at all. We don't know why Australia appears to lack dromaeosaurids, or whether this absence is real or just a gap in the fossil record waiting to be filled. The isolated teeth found there are too fragmentary to confirm presence with certainty. We don't know the full extent of dromaeosaurid diversity in Africa, Antarctica, or South America, continents whose fossil records are sparser than the intensively prospected formations of North America and Asia. Each new discovery has the potential to overturn our biogeographic assumptions, to reveal unexpected connections or unexpected isolations. What we do know is that dromaeosaurids were among the most widespread and persistent of all non-avian dinosaur families. From their origins more than 160 million years ago to their extinction 66 million years ago, they occupied every continent and adapted to virtually every terrestrial environment available to them, from polar forests enduring months of darkness to arid deserts, from tropical lakesides to temperate coastal plains. This global success, maintained over such vast stretches of time, marks the Dromaeosaurids as one of evolution's great success stories, a family of predators whose legacy endures in the birds that fly above us today, the ultimate Dromaeosaurid descendants who conquered not just the world, but the sky itself. The Dromaeosaurids we've explored today bear little resemblance to the scaly monsters of popular imagination. These were feathered, warm-blooded predators whose sophisticated brains, acute senses, and versatile anatomy allowed them to thrive across the globe for over 100 million years. From crow-sized tree climbers to half-ton giants, they represented one of evolution's most successful predatory experiments, adapting to every continent and nearly every terrestrial environment. What makes Dromaeosaurids particularly significant is what they reveal about the dinosaur-bird transition. The elaborate feathers, the hollow bones, the grasping hands, these weren't bird features grafted onto reptiles. They were ancestral traits shared by both groups, inherited from common Jurassic ancestors. Every time you watch a bird take flight, you're witnessing the legacy of these remarkable predators, the only Dromaeosaurid lineage to survive the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous. Thank you for joining us on this journey through deep time, exploring the real raptors that once ruled our world.